how way, ay, 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 ay. How we up, how we up, ay, 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 ay. How way, ay, 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 how way, ay, 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 ay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Kira Young, and you've reached me at Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we are simulcasting with People's Internet Radio and Real Liberty Media. Welcome, everyone. Today's show is live from Camp White Pine. Woohoo! Yay! Awesome. So if you don't know the background on Camp White Pine, you can certainly look it up, but it's a resistance camp that's filled with land defenders putting their bodies in the way of the Mariner East pipeline. The goal of today's show is to give you the perspective of the people in this camp from their lips, from their own point of view. There's a lot of spin out there, and there's a lot of twisting of words and intentions. So I wanted to give everybody here the opportunity to introduce themselves, and however they want to introduce themselves, use their real name or their camp name or whatever name you want to use, and then tell us what brought you here, why you're here, why it's so important that you're here right now at this time in history. So we're going to start with Ellen, who is the landowner, and welcome to the bridge. Ellen?
I'm Ellen Gerhardt. I live here in Huntington County. This is my property that the Mariner East 2 pipeline is set to go through, or try to go through. We are very concerned about the environmental impact of this pipeline and the non-necessity of this pipeline being built.
My name is Jimmy, and I am here at camp as part of ongoing anti-colonial work, as well as environmental justice, racial justice, and various forms of indigenous restoration projects. And look forward to being with y'all on the show today.
Hi, I'm Kari. I am at Camp White Pine to fight against ecocide and I guess help bring to light that corporate rights and capitalism is sort of something that has taken value, at least through our government, over people's lives and our natural resources. So that is part of why I'm here.
My name's Cass. I'm here at Camp White Pine, just kind of lend a hand, do whatever I can do. Just sort of here, like, trying to make sense of the situation that we're all in, and trying to fight back where we can, where we're at, and trying to find like those little points of resistance that can hopefully, grow and shape things to come, rather than just sort of standing by and accepting like what they're gonna give us. So just here.
My name is Dan. I came to Camp White Pine, hearing what was going on, to support this front of this much larger struggle against all extraction, against the capitalist system that's threatening the very existence of life on Earth. Yeah.
What's up? My name is Kai. I'm based out of Pittsburgh, which is a little less than 3 hours away from Huntington County. And, this pipeline is slated to cut across the entire state of Pennsylvania. So it most definitely impacts me and my friends in Pittsburgh as well. So I'm here for that reason. And I don't trust our legal or political system to actually implement justice. I've seen that fail time and time again. So I'm here joining others to really take a stand for what is right.
All right. Well, great. Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for taking the time to let the outside world know why you're here. I want to get into even the idea of fracking and see if any of you or each of you, we're going to pass the phone around again, remember that moment that you fully absorbed the reality of what fracking is and what it's actually doing to our planet. Yeah, because it's my theory that the reason why more people aren't concerned is that that's a really hard reality to fully absorb. And so I'm kind of interested in finding out what's different about us. How come we were able to absorb that truth and others weren't? What's the difference between us and people who aren't really doing anything yet? So.
This is Ellen. My family was originally from Western Pennsylvania, and I grew up with all of my relatives working in the steel mills in the Pittsburgh area. And I mean, I remember the time when you could barely breathe the air around Pittsburgh. Things were just getting dumped into the Ohio River. And, Pittsburgh really had a horrible reputation for that. And then finally, people started becoming concerned about the air, about the water, about what was going on, and started cleaning the area up. And, Pittsburgh still isn't ideal, but it's much better than it was before. What's happening now with the fracking is we seem to be backtracking. We had a period of time when the environment and concerns about the environment were paramount, and now there seems to be a lot of backsliding toward supporting corporations who are extracting the resources from the land without any regard to what they're doing to the land or the people that are living on the land. And being from Western Pennsylvania, I'm aware of, communities like Dimmock in Butler County that have now, they're going on 6-7 years with undrinkable water because of the fracking that's going on. And it seems totally illogical for us as a nation to be reverting back to, the bad old days when, we didn't know any better. And now supposedly we do, but we're still doing horrible things to people and the environment.
I think some of the introduction to fracking, or at least certain moments for me, came from stories initially, because much of the truth about the realities of fracked gas weren't actually portrayed well because of how media is owned by the same corporations that are also responsible for the extraction from the very beginning, drilling to export overseas in the form of liquefied natural gas. But I remember a story about Pennsylvanians who basically were farmers, cattle farmers, whose land was leased and the fracking began and cows started dying. And eventually the landowner also succumbed to a very rare form of brain cancer by a very well-known nefarious company that we're currently fighting in other parts of the country too. So understanding that even though it may have happened in one spot that we're aware of from that moment, that the stories are cascading across the country at this point. Other places that I've been able to see some of these atrocities are in schoolyards, for example, where there are multiple frack wells that have been set up right next door to the playgrounds where children are playing. And I think seeing this, as Ellen mentioned, sort of backtracking, it's literally trying to pull out ancient history from the ground, so to speak. You're unearthing, I don't know, you could consider them maybe burial sites as well, in many senses of that term. And I guess the ongoing imagery is like a Tolkien reference that many probably get, but the dwarves would delve too deeply and too greedily. There were repercussions. So I'll just kind of leave it at that for now.
Hi, this is Kari again. I guess for me, my fight against fracking began, I have a little bit of a different perspective. A few years ago, I was actually working at an oil and gas company and hedge fund, and I heard stories about fracking. You hear stories, they don't really affect you, but as I was working at this company, I was reading the language that they were using to tell people that fracking wasn't bad, and I knew that it was wrong, and it became about pushing back and getting the truth out there. It's not right that the language that they use it's gaslighting people, it's twisting the reality, it's propaganda. And so after working at that particular company, I decided I wanted to become more involved in anti-fracking campaigns and really getting on the ground and getting involved in this movement.
This is Cass. I think I got into this in sort of a circuitous way, doing sort of food justice, social justice work in cities, primarily in Philly. Shout out Food Not Bombs in Philly, Cruz. And just sort of making connections between environmental issues, environmental racism, particularly like South Philly, and the kind of the high rates of asthma and other kind of conditions related to oil and gas refining, the sort of the train cars that run through parts of Philadelphia, and seeing sort of the how certain people are affected and certain people aren't. So seeing that from like a sort of food justice, racial justice aspect, and sort of doing that work. And then, of course, like a lot of people probably here and well as well because of Standing Rock, and following that closely through social media and looking at that work, and then just having a friend tell me, hey, there's this thing going on in right near you, right near Philly, that is directly connected. It's the same company, it's the same fight, it's really something direct that you can latch onto, and it isn't about going somewhere else. Not saying that that's not a good thing if you have the means or ability to do that, but there's so many fights everywhere right around you in Philadelphia that I felt like I could do some work here, and cooking for people, and just kind of doing some sort of general stuff. So I sort of hearing about this through friends, and just being here and being here for months, and just kind of seeing it firsthand, and seeing what we could do, what we could potentially just physically stopping the construction. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, making all these connections between all these various things that really are part of the same. I mean, this pipeline is going to go through parts of south of Philadelphia and Westchester, and it's going to be going through mostly poor areas, mostly poor black areas, where a lot of the most dangerous aspects of the pipeline and refining process are going to happen. So really stepping up and realizing that, well, this maybe is out in rural Pennsylvania, but of each long line, this pipeline, this is all part of the same sort of system, and wherever we can put pressure is fine by me.
Yeah, I think on a similar note to what Cass was talking about, I definitely came from a perspective of being involved mostly in anti-war and kind of anti-imperialist type organizing. And it really was a few years ago that I really started kind of seeing the connections between the destruction of the environment and particularly with regard to, extreme climate chaos that, these, multinational corporations will squeeze every ounce of profit out of the earth. And, we talk about climate change, and it's as if it's this thing that affects everyone equally, but the reality is the places that are being affected by climate change right now, where people are really suffering massive drought, massive famines, these things, it's not in the first world, it's not in the colonizing countries, it's in the colonized, and it's in places in Africa and South America and Asia, where people are suffering the brunt of it. And that's why we see this massive, one of the major reasons that we see this massive refugee crisis of people forced to flee to the countries that have been pillaging the entire world and are making large segments of it quickly uninhabitable. So that for me is a really big part of working to stop extraction and stop oil and gas infrastructure that is literally burning large segments of the planet up.
Yeah, this is Kai. I kind of want to echo what Cass was saying about the connection between racial justice and climate justice. When I started getting involved in issues of social justice, I was working both around worker issues and environmental issues. But it would always piss me off a lot of times how, the climate crisis was framed as sort of an existential issue. People saying, oh, I want a planet for my grandchildren, when I'm like, yo, just like look around. And, as the previous two people just said, like, we are not all affected the same. And so one example that like really motivated me to get more into climate justice and try to make that connection with people, no matter where I was going or what kind of work I was doing, was hearing about this state correctional institution in southwestern Pennsylvania in Fayette County. And it was getting some publicity because a lot of the inmates were having health problems, particularly respiratory problems, and it was being linked directly to a coal ash dump, just like right next to the prison. And it's something that we see a lot in like kind of more rural areas of the state. Is they'll frack and they'll just extract all this stuff out of the earth, and when they're all done with that, then they build prisons there, which then obviously disproportionately affects poor folks and people of color. So kind of just making that connection has been really important for me, and I try to drive that home wherever I'm going.
Great. Yeah. So all of what you're saying makes it kind of a really good segue into, I wanted to get into the connection between racial justice, environmental justice, but I also wanted to make that connection for rural America, because rural America really is many times in that same spot that poor areas of color are in, and that rural America gets all the destruction and none of the infrastructure, none of the none of the good stuff out of it. It's kind of like this pipeline is like, we're just going to get the destruction and none of the actual energy from it. And then the way that the whole system is set up is that the true cost of this fracking is never even calculated, because the environmental cost, the cost of people's health, non-human lives and health and the planet it's never calculated into the equation. So people standing there saying, hey, let's look at this propaganda, let's look at how this cost is too huge for us to pay. And the other thing I want to echo here is that I think it was Cass who said there's a lot of fights out there that you can get involved in. So on the one hand, any of us can just say, hey, you know what, I want to do something. And there's like so many fights out there for you to get involved in, so many connections to make. But I think on the other hand, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all of these different front lines that we may find ourselves on. So I want to talk a little bit more about those intersections and how, on the one hand, there's a lot of fights, and on the other hand, we can get overwhelmed. But on the other hand, we're making all these connections through just doing the work itself, just putting your foot out there and start doing the work, and those connections happen, and miracles happen, and relationships are built, and somehow things fall into place, and we actually can win some of these battles using the systems that are in place and creating new ones. So I don't know if that's a question, but it's more of a sort of philosophical thing to think about with this next round of input here.
Okay, this is Ellen again. I am almost daily overwhelmed with the fact that there are people who have been willing to come here and put time and effort into this particular spot in this fight, because this pipeline is 350 miles long, this particular one. And, you know, there could be a fight anywhere along this pipeline, and that people are willing to, you know, come and give time and give effort and, you know, pour themselves into this project to stop this pipeline. It gets pretty overwhelming at times. And, you know, I find myself at times feeling guilty because I know there are other fights going on, and I feel like, well, I should be out, you know, somebody is publicizing a rally or publicizing something like this, and it's like, I should be out there supporting these people too. But sometimes it's just not physically possible. So there are incredible networks that have been set up, different organizations that are fighting not just the Mariner, but the Atlantic Sunrise. You know, people who have been out in the Dakotas fighting DAPL, down in Texas at Big Bend, down in Florida. You know, you could pick a fight anywhere along almost any state. And, you know, you have to find your community. There for a while, we felt like we were middle Pennsylvania. We're in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows where we are. You know, what are we going to do? And then just gradually, you know, people start offering supports, people start offering connections. You find out about other groups that are involved. And there's an incredible network of people out there, maybe not all fighting the same battle, but fighting multiple battles, but supporting each and every one who is involved in this.
I love that. This is Jimmy, and I'm just going to kind of go from what Ellen shared, and a lot of the work I do is highly mobile, and I suppose it's about maybe generating solidarity and acknowledging that solidarity is just a word. And at least from my own observations and experiences with working with people throughout, that as privilege, whether it's race or class or gender, increases, the capacity for solidarity in theory should increase as well, and it probably does. But more often than not, the good intentions don't actually lead to action. And so what that could also lead to in what we're talking about here, this is much more rural. And so it's so wonderful to have folks that are more city dwellers being here, because there's a relationship that's been schismed for generations, divide and conquer tactics, call them what you will. But in order to kind of mend that relationship, it does come back into the realm of dealing with explicit white supremacy culture. We'll call it alt-right, call it any number of things that involve the continuation or advancement of white supremacy culture, and how, because of the neglect that rural communities have experienced, whether it's resources or attention, any number of different things, it's also made it so that they've become a recruiting ground, or I consider them more like an extraction ground for white supremacist hate groups to come in and make promises, which isn't too dissimilar to the same promise of coal, fracked gas, whatever it might be. So understanding that historic connection is really important for me, just because I also have roots that are both very urban, very disenfranchised, very much divided by imperial colonial powers. And so if I don't play to that understanding for myself, it's like I don't really know what else to do. But at least that helps guide my work to both travel and be with people where they are, to understand the nuances, and also how not just resisting for the sake of resisting or taking a direct action in order to stop something, but how are we actually building our relationships with one another, because that is what will kind of determine the rest of how we go forward in the world together or apart.
Hi. So I think social and economic justice issues and environmental issues, the lines definitely blur in regard to the fact that it involves corporations whose bottom line is money. And fighting these pipelines allows us to like directly impact that. It is an immediate direct impact on corporations' ability to just plow through places and make the money at the while people are sacrificing their water, they're sacrificing the land that they've made their home. And so I think in that regard, this fight does impact those different areas. And I think that that's sort of a good place to start. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to a point that Jimmy brought up about, the split between like urban and rural. I mean, as someone who is a city dweller, I was born in a city, but I definitely have spent most of my life, in cities. And I think, and also kind of to Helen's point earlier about how much is going on in a city. I feel like that's amplified. There's so many things to get plugged into. There's so many rallies and marches and demonstrations you can go to, and not saying those aren't important, but it's exhausting. And there's like a lot of ways that you can plug in, but then it sometimes feels like you're never doing enough. And I don't know. I think for me personally, what shifted in my thinking was like a couple of years ago, going to like a direct action camp by this group collective called TWAC, Trans and or Women's Action Camp, and sort of developing some really awesome skills around like doing things out in rural areas and making the connections. I think that year TWAC was organizing around the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington, and so making those connections between borders and deportation and environmental justice, and applying these skills like really directly and actionally, and taking the fight to ICE, to corporations that are running the jails. In that case, it's Corrections Corporation of America. And trying to bridge these gaps between sort of urban and rural organizing, realizing how my skill set and how I can develop those skills and be useful, and really sort of digging in and feeling sort of more of a, visceral connection to it. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's definitely been at least part of my shift in thinking. Is there's always more you can do, but it's not necessarily always what you should be doing or what maybe is most needed. And I think, yeah, especially rural places having not a lot of connection, and yeah, and like KKK and like all these groups that can come in and like really like organize way better, way more efficiently than some of us want to admit, because of how divided urban and rural areas are. And I think in a lot of ways, like, yeah, urban areas need to step up, because there's this sort of urban elitism that comes in a lot, where people are like, oh, I don't want to go there, I don't want to do that, like that's it's a redneck country, I don't fuck with that. But like, which is real and true, but like it's also need to build those connections, otherwise someone else is gonna.
Yeah, completely. I just really agree completely with what Cass was saying, and I guess what I'd add is, I think in situations like this, and this is applicable to a lot of different struggles, but just taking the pipeline, people are facing up, it's just regular people coming up against a multi-billion-dollar energy corporation, some of the most powerful corporations in the world, and they're saying, we're going to put this pipeline through here and there's nothing you can do about it, and you can either take our, little tiny amount of money, or you can, lose even worse, and we'll make you regret it. And I think that, Ellen was talking earlier about how, the feeling being overwhelmed by how many people have been coming out just to support this struggle here. But it's, I think it's this understanding among a lot of people that, it's so incredible that, Ellen and Elise were like, fuck no, and we're going to fight. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do when you're up against such a powerful company. And so really creating the narrative that it is possible to fight back against these bullies who have huge amounts of power and money. And, hopefully create an example that other people can realize that it is possible to fight back. Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny when, like, thinking about, capitalism and imperialism and how all the isms intersect, it gets really overwhelming and daunting. But, like, kind of my guiding philosophy moving through this world is don't be a jagoff, And I feel like it really, at the base level, is that simple. Like, somewhere along the way, capitalism has poisoned the way that we look at each other and interact with each other and how we value things in this life. And although it's cliche, there's only so much each of us can do. And it really is about starting with yourself, acting out the values that you want to see in your own interpersonal relationships, and just keep on doing that. And if you're doing things right, that effect will multiply. And that's one thing that I've loved about camp, we're as much about blocking this pipeline, saying no to something that's destroying the earth, as we are about like creating an intentional community here that is taking care of each other and looking after each other. And I truly believe like cares about each other in a deep way, and that goes beyond just this shared goal that we have together. And so I think creation is a really important thing. Creativity is a really important thing that we need right now in this time where everything seems so up in the air. And just the last thing I'll say is, like, there are so many roles to be played too. And so that's something, right now I happen to have the privilege and flexibility to stay at camp for an extended period of time, but my role is constantly shifting. I'm constantly trying to figure out what my role is. And so, like, yeah, going back to, there's so many battles everywhere, no matter where you are. Don't be overwhelmed by the thought that, like, oh, I should be doing so much more, because every role is important and we're working together.
Yeah. So apologies to the FCC. I forgot to tell people that we try to refrain from the F-bombs. I'm prone to them myself, so I should have said that. But no harm, no foul. I mean, no worries. But that is the logical response to what we're dealing with is the F-bomb. No, it truly is. So there's two things that I want to get to, and we've started to talk about it a little bit, and that's intentional community. But I want to talk about intentional community and how that's sort of backed by your spirituality or your spiritual orientation, and just talk about it for yourself, like how this building community is developing you spiritually, as well as empowering you to express that spirituality through your work. So, because I think that's the grounding of this is a sacred task. That's what I feel when I'm here with you guys, is that it feels like a sacred task or a sacred duty for you to be here. So I just wanted to get into that a little bit, get deeper into the spiritual side of this.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I grew up in a small town, but I always felt more at home out in the forest and outside of the town limits. There's just something, if you haven't been out and you haven't just sat and listened and watched and observed what is going on around you, so many people have lost that connection. And I remember like the classic story of ask a little kid where the milk comes from. It comes from the store. It doesn't come from a cow. Where do you get your food? It's, in a package somewhere. And I think a lot of us have lost that being in touch with our roots and where everything comes from. I just, waking up in the morning and listening to the birds, or going to night and listening to the frogs and the crickets, and there's something just very peaceful and grounding about all that I think a lot of us have lost somewhere along the line. And I think if we were able to get in touch with that, even for a little bit, it changes your perspective on how everything is connected. People don't realize that, okay, if, we saw it in our past history, you get rid of a predator in one area because, it's going after the same prey that you're trying to hunt. And what happens? You upset the balance of things. So what do we end up doing? We're trying to reintroduce what we knocked off in the first place. And people don't realize that there's a delicate balance that man just comes in and upsets without even thinking about it. And I think if we could get in touch more with that and see more of that occurring, we'd be much better off.
So Jimmy again. Not sure where I want to go with this. I think when it comes down to, there's sort of like the quote unquote intentional community, which has become kind of a big thing, or a growing thing that tends to be geared for very specific demographics. Feel free and look that up. I'm not going to talk about it here. But in terms of how I choose to operate in this world, it's probably kind of a hard break away from both the model of an quote unquote intentional community as well as maybe what is considered conventional by most folks' standards. So I end up having the honor, privilege of being with various groups and various people who understand very deeply solidarity because it's a way of living, as opposed to this is something that we're going to add on because it's convenient for us, or only because it's convenient for us can we add this on. So either way they approach it, and with that deep understanding, it changes how sort of I was brought up, because I was brought up fairly mainstream with some. I have excellent parents who exposed me to certain things, but I was still brought up in a very mainstream culture that does not play well into breaking out of very individualistic capitalist striving at all costs. And so I still need to confront that within myself because there's no escaping it, but we can take steps so that the next iteration of ourselves, as well as the next iterations of those who we choose to call family, can have that benefit of discernment and insight going forward. So I think part of where I'm coming from too is that I don't have the same type of rooted family connections biologically as well. I'll just say that I'm adopted, and so that creates another realm of mystery and intentionality that I have to put forward myself, where for many folks who are not in that situation, who have their known histories, already have sort of a given community that they understand deeply and they can ask about. So with the work that I do, it does definitely connect to how I wish to be in the world just as much as how I want to relate to the people that are in it. So with that in mind, a different model of intentional community. Check.
This is Kari again. I guess it's my personal philosophy that the earth and the sky and the air and the water belong to everyone, or really no one, and that there is enough on earth to sustain everyone. My philosophy is one of sharing. I feel like people get really locked into a religion of greed. This is mine. Don't look at it. Don't touch it. Don't even breathe near it. But as far as like intentional community, we take care of each other here. We check in. We share what we have, our resources, and I think it really brings us together. It allows us to have a healthy function and be able to do what we're here to do, because when we're checking in with each other, when we're living intentionally, we're strong. And I think it's just really important, particularly when you're involved with movements like that, to have that intentional like community and living together and checking in with each other and making sure you're okay, and everyone's able to do what they're here to do. So it is a spirituality of just like, I live with you, I respect your space, and I care about you. So
I care about you too. I don't know if I can say it any better, I think, than Ellen did. I think to me it is about grounding. It's about like, if you're not grounded, you can't really be intentional with other people. If you're not with yourself, you can't be with other people. And I feel personally for myself, being out here, being around nature, around trees, around everything, around life, waking up to the birds, to the sun, walking around under the moonlight. It's really beautiful moonlight here last night. It was great to be walking the paths and not need a headlamp, not need that just being there, and it is really grounding, and we have lost those connections. A lot of us have, not everyone, but I certainly, how I grew up, food came from a package, came from a store, like ready meals and all of that, or just in general the vibe of what I grew up with, and the places I've felt the most intentional community have been like in these these natural places, and so I think it's just to be about grounding and about being with myself, and like that is my spirituality. And so I mean, I came to that really late. Was grown up with, sort of conventional norms, conventional religion, Catholic, which nothing bad about it. It's just like it never really clicked with me in a way that just like being out here does.
Yeah, this is Dan, and I think for me, definitely echoing people said, I do like being out, and I love being out in wild spaces, and particularly in the last few years, kind of regaining the kind of connection to the natural world, to community, to my own body that I feel like this system and capitalism really forces out of you, because it's pretty important to separate people from those things to be able to function in this wildly unnatural environment of capitalism. And that's been really important. I think the other kind of really, you could call it spiritual aspect of this is we were talking about, really being daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. And I think to realize your responsibility in this world at this time we're living in, and attempt to work towards that, because I certainly think it's working towards it. Can't really be at what you quite should be doing necessarily, but working towards that, and really realizing the importance of that. I guess for me, like as a settler on this land, realizing in terms of my connection to this land, for me a lot of the importance of that really revolves around working towards an anti-colonial and decolonial perspective, because this isn't my land, and I have a deep connection with this land, but it's not mine. And I think for those of us who are settlers on this land, it is our responsibility, very much so, to be working and supporting as best we can indigenous struggles here, to cement our connection to the land.
This is Kai. Recently there was a PBS article that came out about camp that said that people that stay at Camp White Pine, quote unquote, prefer the country to the city. And I was thinking about that because I actually don't think I do. Like, truthfully, I'm based out of Pittsburgh. I like Pittsburgh a lot. I like being in cities a lot. I'm kind of used to life in the city to a certain extent. I mean, Pittsburgh ain't big by any means, but it definitely has a different feel. But while I'm there in my day-to-day life, I often find myself asking, like, why is it so hard to just live? Like, why can't I just be? I'm just trying to kick it. Like, and because especially there's always something going on. There's it feels, especially like while I was working as a community organizer, it felt like everything that I was working on was like the world depended on it, so it was like very stressful environment. And even being out here, it was not my intention at all coming out, but like it has been very grounding and spiritual. It's been like really magical just being able to like lose track of the time, and like a day just goes by and you're like, wow, I was just like being with myself and with others all day. And that's been really beautiful and does definitely feel spiritual.
So we're, let's see, we have a few minutes before we're going to go to a break, and then we have another hour of radio. During the break, you guys can tell me about things that you might want to get to, and then I will try to check on messages and things like that maybe some people in the audience might want to know, have some questions and things like that. But one of the things that occurred to me, especially when Ellen was talking, is about like overall well-being and health, and how when we're not living in the natural world, we're forgetting about our place in it. And so as people, we come in and we disturb this delicate balance because we're not but we're meant to live in balance. We're meant to live as part of that delicate balance. And so, our separation from that is really huge. Even when we intentionally try to live in balance, there's still this, there's still something that separates us. And so I think it could possibly be our own background noise. Camp life. It could possibly be that we have like this programming that tells us that we're separate or above or in somehow in control of nature. But when we put ourselves in more of, like you were talking about, Ellen, the observation role of just observing this delicate balance, we not only do we learn about nature, but we learn about ourselves in that exercise, or in that passive exercise. For myself, I've been living in the woods for about 5 years, and I've noticed that my mental health is greatly better. I also don't have a TV anymore for 5 years, so I don't watch TV anymore. It's a waste of time. But I'm definitely addicted to social media, so you sometimes replace one addiction with another. That happens, but we learn about ourselves through that as well. We really do, and there are aspects of social media that are incredibly empowering that we need to continue to leverage. So there's that. 2 more minutes. Did anybody have a 2-minute thing they wanted to talk about before we go to break, or should I ramble for another 2 minutes before we go to break? And you guys can think about what you might want to talk about. Looks like everything's going pretty good technically here. We're streaming real strong. So stick around, everybody. We will be back. Please message, put your questions in the chat, and Majikia will message me during the break. But since I'm doing this on my phone, it's hard for me to check messages while we're doing the show itself. So if you have any questions, please prepare them now and ask them now in the chat, and I'll see if I can't get to them. Thank you. I want to also take a minute to thank everybody in the background. Thank you, Stephen, for hosting. You are awesome. Thank you, Majikia, for your digital roadieing and your promoing. And thanks, Grimner, for streaming us on Real Liberty Media. And thank you, of course, to the listeners who care and want to know about what's really going on in the resistance. Stick around. All right, we are back. Welcome to the second hour, The Bridge with Kira. We are live from Camp White Pine, and we're talking to some, I don't know how you all identify as yourselves. Maybe this next round you can say how you identify if you do. Land defenders, water protectors, pipeline fighters, normal people doing normal things. I don't know how you identify, but define normal, please. I don't know. But one of the things that has really struck me, since this is my third time here, is what we were talking about before, is this intentional community, and how you've in some ways kind of inoculated yourselves to the problem of paranoia of infiltrators. And you haven't?
Not really.
No? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that, because we're our adversary really has a frightening history and a frightening arsenal in their corner, and they're using it in various ways. Some ways more obvious than others. The less obvious ways are the creation of doubt, the divide and conquer, the paranoia, the purposeful spread of paranoia throughout the community of infiltrators, and the the fear of kind of some of the stuff that came out in the Intercept articles of, being followed, and these are mercenaries. These are people who don't seem to have a conscience in the work that they do, don't seem to have an ethic, sort of like highest bidder type of situation. So this next round, I guess each of you kind of speak to that about the how you personally deal with the paranoia that our adversary would like to spread in this community of people that care about each other and the environment enough to put your bodies on the line to stop its destruction.
Switching it up.
Yeah, we're going backwards now.
This is Kai. Yeah, we do talk about security culture at camp and what people are comfortable with sharing. It's something I've been struggling with personally. I'm very public about, I'm public about the fact that I'm here. Obviously, keep details on the DL. But, I think it's almost a moot point, to worry or buy too much into that paranoia. I do believe, that we're going to face more and more state repression. Anybody that's doing similar type of work. And I think, in this day and age with the technology, like they have so much information on each of us already. So instead of allowing that to stop us, we should be more bold than ever, and encourage others to do the same, because we do have power in numbers. The more people are willing to speak out, the less they'll be able to crack down on each of us individually. So yeah, I think it almost pushes me to be even more vocal about it, to be like, yo, I'm just some guy. And anybody could be doing this. You could be doing similar work wherever you are. It doesn't take, somebody with, a degree in this sort of thing to understand what's going on. Like, so many people are sensing that this stuff is messed up. And that's really where we're all beginning. And so, power in numbers.
Yeah, this is Dan, and definitely echo that. And anytime you're doing any work that's actually effective in some regard into causing problems for the powerful and the state and the corporations that run them, it becomes clear that what states really are, which are just organized institutions with monopolies on violence. And you look to the history of any type of movement that was really threatening to the capitalist white supremacist order, and they faced intense repression. You look at how many people from the 60s and 70s, from the Black Panther Party, the American Indian movement, other groups that were facing, massive prison sentences, massive infiltration, some people straight up politically assassinated. You see that when organizing work is actually becoming threatening to those in power, they will repress you by any and all force at their disposal. And I think all that shows is why it's so important to resist these institutions and why it's so important to work to fight them. And so I don't think it's something that can stop us from doing the work we're going to do. I think it's something that should encourage us to do it even harder, because these are really violent systems and we got to fight them.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, but also it's really easy to get caught up in the state repression game and have us mistrust in each other and mistrust in everyone, and just and it's real. We had drones fly through our camp. We know that they're watching and monitoring things. Tiger Swan, that's their business. Their business is in information and in surveillance, and so we can appreciate that knowledge that we have, that's a reality. But it's easy to get really, really caught up in it. And I think whenever I think about this, there's a particular article So, and Dan, this is kind of working off of your point, because this article talks a lot about like the movements in the 60s and 70s, and like Black Panther Party in particular. It's called "Why Misogynists Make Great Informants," and I think the point that article makes is it doesn't matter whether an informant is a misogynist or a misogynist is an informant. They both do the same work. They both the work that they do within movement spaces and doing the kind of things that that misogynists do is designed to tear communities apart, to really subvert any sort of resistance that can build when it actually becomes a real threat. And I think sort of along with that, yeah, we can get caught up in all of the technology that they're using and every kind of, we can keep up with it, we can use Signal, we can do all these things, but at the same time, the best thing that we have is to be able to trust each other and to be able to have the strength in community and collectivity to check each other and to protect each other from, be it state repression or be it, just some dude who's gonna do the same work, be that destructive force. And I think it takes a lot, and it's not easy, and it requires a lot of this word intentionality, but it's that's kind of where I think about it, and trying to take a step back and be like, okay, well what really matters is how we're relating to each other, and if we're doing that honestly, and if we're doing that in a way that we can be safe with one another, then that's something they can never take away.
This is Kari. I think it can feel pretty overwhelming to think about I'm just a person who wants to defend the land or the trees or the water, going up against privatized military, corporate mercenaries. And I just personally try to remember that I'm here for the right reasons. I'm here, I know what I'm doing is right. And they're trying to use fear to stop me. Whether they want to call me an economic or eco-terrorist for doing nothing. Because we've done nothing, and we've already had this language thrown at us that is really violent. And we haven't had any confrontation. So I just have to remind myself that I'm not going to be afraid of doing the right thing, ever. And that's just how I personally deal with it.
Thanks. This is Jimmy again. It feels like we've definitely got a pretty good understanding of the repression and state stuff going on. So I'm going to maybe offer a little bit from my own background in terms of dealing with the realities of paranoia. And a few others have already mentioned how important it is to develop trust, not just security culture. Same ways of kind of considering how military is run from a very hierarchical command structure, not unlike a corporation, not unlike a nonprofit or an NGO, and there's going to be similar results of dehumanizing people, especially those who are not at the very top. But to get back into what I was talking about in terms of dealing with the stress and anxiety, the various things that go into holding each other in safer spaces, there's a definite toll and tax, et cetera, on the individual, whether it is direct physical health and wellness. Could also be what's oftenly avoided and kind of shunned in some places, like issues with mental health, mental wellness, that it's really easy to to do all of this good work and then also be terribly, terribly ableist, and not having any way of actually dealing with things that come up in your own life at that point too. Whether it is like, could be a mental break, could be any number of things related to, as we know, as I know, related to like PTSD in response to active state repression and surveillance. And so those are things that I come from more family that are veterans of imperialist wars, and they all carry these things but have not had a really healthy way of dealing with them. So if anything, if we can approach each other in ways that are not highly militarized in terms of how we deal with right now under current surveillance by Tiger Swung among others, but how we're going to be doing this going forward, knowing that, as Kai said, things are going to probably escalate. And we have to be able to have a strong voice. We have to be able to breathe. We have to be able to express these things in all way, shape, and form together as best we can.
Okay, this is Ellen. I never realized when this started how incredibly naive I must be. Because my philosophy has always been kind of, you just trust people and they're going to do the right thing, and that's just the way it is. And it's actually not the way it is, that I found out. But I think one of the first times was when we were in court for eminent domain hearing, and the Sunoco lawyers come in and they have these pages and pages and pages of Facebook posts. And it's like, really? You're worried about what we're posting on Facebook? And that somebody had said, that there was going to be this encampment and they were inviting people, and 900 and some people had been contacted and 42 people were going to show up. And it's like, whoa, they're concerned that 42 people might be on our property. And just the fact that, somebody would be that concerned with what's going on here to be doing that kind of monitoring. And then most recently with this latest injunction, and they come right out and talk about this particular action here being hijacked by radical anarchists and eco-terrorists. And I'm thinking, okay, who are they talking about? Because I don't really know any of these people. I've met some really nice people, really wonderful people, really amazing people that I would never classify as being, maybe anarchists, but certainly not dangerous or terrorists or anything like that. And it's like, it's just unbelievable that this kind of language is being used, and you're thinking, wow, if they're thinking that about us, what are they thinking about themselves? Mm-hmm. Because who are the ones that are coming in and running roughshod over people and destroying the environment and things like that? And it's certainly not us. So the whole thing with, when people were talking about, should we have an open camp or a closed camp? And I'm thinking, okay, what does that mean? People are showing up all the time. And I don't know. I guess I've learned some stuff along the way, and I've learned maybe not to be quite as open about some things as others, and people are rapidly realizing that you can't change names on me too many times because I won't remember them. But there has, within the group that's here, I think there's an incredible amount of trust that we have among ourselves, and if we are creating this much concern with Sunoco, I say more power to us.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point about anarchists, and I think that the anarchist contribution is a lot of times not really discussed in these efforts. well, maybe it is by you guys, but I think one of the places that conversation got gate kept was Standing Rock. There was a lot of anarchist contribution at Standing Rock that was just like never even talked about. And except if you go there, you saw all the anarchist groups that were there, and they're really viable contributions that they made. So I certainly love anarchist philosophy, and I don't know if that makes me an anarchist, but I would much rather be sitting in a room full of anarchists than Tiger Swan or even, Democrats. Let's talk about anarchy.
Let's talk about anarchy. I do identify as an anarchist. It's kind of a guiding political philosophy, and one thing that is appealing to me is that it's not very dogmatic. What it means to me is like you take, the lessons and ideologies that you want to apply in your life, but you don't really have, it's not, you don't have to ascribe to a certain book or one particular thought leader or whatever. And at the base of it, what it means to me is being against hierarchies, being against borders, being against all forms of oppression, and also the belief kind of we've been alluding to is the belief in like localized power and like allowing communities make decisions that affect them directly, make those decisions for themselves, and building power from the ground up so that, we're creating a culture of trust and caring for each other. And then I guess another thing that annoys me about how people perceive anarchy is a lot of the emphasis on, for example, black bloc tactics, which I do support. I support the smashy if it's strategic. It's a personal, but to me, anarchism doesn't stop there. That's only half of the puzzle. We want to destroy and bring down a system that's not working for us, that never really cared about us, but we also need to be creating the alternative world that we want to see and that we want to live in.
Yeah, I think that, I'm Dan. I'm also an anarchist. I think, yeah, for me, I'm very open about that because so many people I know who, have this misconception that's brought, by the state, obviously, that, anarchy means violence and chaos and, someone's going to come and beat you over the head for no reason. And it's like anarchism is the exact opposite of that. It's against the violence of the state and against all systems and institutions of extreme violence. And to be in an anarchist space that does operate on people coming together autonomously and choosing to work together and operating on consensus and on mutual aid, we talk about supporting each other. That's, one of the most key components of anarchism is mutual aid. And that just means solidarity, supporting each other, whether that's, feeding people, whether that's supporting each other through mental health crises, standing side by side while we fight the state, whatever it is, that's direct action and that's mutual aid. And it's so important. And it's really great when I can talk to people about anarchism and at the end of it, they'll be like, wait a minute. I think I'm an anarchist, So, yeah.
My name is Cass, and I too am an anarchist. I definitely I agree like wholeheartedly with what my other two comrades have said. A little bit of that. Red and black. Red and black. I think a lot of the history of like anarchism or anarchy, it's just the term is defined by the state. Like initially, people were called anarchists as a pejorative by the state, And then, sort of over time it became, sort of, now it made me think about it as something reclaimed, or a term that then became a more sort of proactive or positive political identity. But sort of like people have been saying, I'm an anarchist not because I have the answers, because I know I don't have the answers. And I know that the world that has been given to me is not the world that I want to live in, and that I've been shaped by this world. I've been shaped by capitalism, and I need to do a lot of unlearning, and we all do, and we have way more to learn from each other than we do to learn from what came before us, because what came before us is the problem. And simply going along with that, like there's no problem, is the problem. And, bringing attention to the violence that is the everyday, that is going on, that supports, that is necessary, not necessary in the way that we need it for life, but is necessary for the system to sustain itself. That knowledge is worth way more than a broken window. And that especially liberals who get so upset when a Starbucks window is smashed, like they'll never get a Frappuccino again. It's just so frustrating when you think of the enormity of the problem, and that, right now in Hamburg, in Germany, against the G20, like that is going on right now, and people are throwing down, and it's anarchists who are holding the line. The black bloc tactics that are being used there to protect people who are being brutally attacked by the state, by police, using, water cannons, using all that, and having a show of force, of solidarity with each other and learning from each other. I think, that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful sound.
Hi, I'm Kari. I guess I'm one of the, I think I'm an anarchist people. I'm former reformed Bernie Sanders supporter. I really saw how democracy sort of ignores the voice of the people. And how corporatized our government really is, and it made me mad. And I wanted to become involved in a way to fight repression and oppression, and I somehow fell into this network, and it's been like a truly amazing learning experience for me. I learn from the people that I'm around every day how to be a better person, how to be a better neighbor, or how to help my community more. And it's just, people think anarchy is this really scary word, but once you learn a little bit about it, you're like, wow, that's pretty great. It's not scary. It's like actually has a lot of heart in it. So that's really all I can say about it. Sorry.
This is Jimmy again. I am also probably a member of the Circle A team, and I don't necessarily personally lead with being an anarchist, because I don't think it's that relevant most of the time, unless we're talking about philosophies of anarchy, which tends to also be a very specific demographic of people talking about it, and I don't engage that way usually. But I think in terms of anti-authoritarian, anti-state, all of the aspects that would lead to more, I guess, consensual culture when it comes down to it, because you lose that option, or you give that option away once you feed back into certain modes of thinking. When I think of, for example, the Democratic Party, which again is just, as far as I'm concerned, it's a corporation, whatever you want to call it, candy coated, if you will. That same rule kind of applies. You're already part of the.
They did identify themselves as a corporation in response to the DNC lawsuit. They said, the Democratic Party said, technically we're a corporation, so we're not obligated to follow our own rules. So
All
You are
right.
correct.
All right, so the Democratic Nationalist Corporation. And so, again, inherently white supremacist, but so is the other party. But I guess going in that realm, too, it's also a certain degree of anti-electoral politics, especially in the confines of what is called the United States of America by some. And I, I definitely feel that there's a difference in working with folks that have made the sometimes kind of traumatic break away from what they were raised to understand about who they are. Because part of it, I think, is understanding that, oh, I can think about myself in certain ways that aren't purely conforming to what I was raised with or what I've been told I should be, which definitely plays back into being in a position where you may feel as though you are worth less than somebody who is white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, citizen, across the board. So being able to question that, if that makes someone an anarchist, I think that's probably for the best. But I do feel as though, like, when working in organizing spaces, there's far more of the stigma that was kind of mentioned with, like, the pejorative of anarchist being, oh, well, it's quote unquote chaos. And so there's there's an issue of being at an action, and some of y'all may have this similar experience, but if like a police officer is engaging with somebody who's part of this protest, and again, don't talk to cops, but in terms of being able to explain when asked, who is the leader of this, blah, 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 who is in charge? And when the response is across the board from anybody that this person engaged with, like, well, no one's in charge. We're a leaderless movement, or whatever the response would be. And so the response of the officer was, oh, so it's anarchy. And so it just that doesn't make much sense, but it's just sort of they're naming what they don't understand as the racial slur or whatever type of pejorative slur to describe it. So just keep that in mind when you hear your liberal and progressive friends inherently, inevitably talking down anarchists, the black bloc, whatever effective experimental strategies might be in place. That's all.
Okay. This is Ellen, and I am apparently part of this problem. Because, growing up, it's like I remember I never really argued much with my parents, although I do remember having a discussion with my father, who was a Army veteran, about the Vietnam War, and that didn't go over well. But, it was kind of always, all right, the speed limit is 35, so you go 35. It says no parking, so you don't park there. I pay my parking tickets. I pay my speeding tickets. And it's like, okay, well, somewhere along the line, end up not planning on getting arrested. And it's like, all right, well, there goes my record. But, there is, I'm 62, so I grew up with the whole 50s, 60s thing that, you followed whatever the laws were, you followed whatever the leaders said, that was what you were supposed to do. And honestly, I thought I was being rather radical this year because I voted for Bernie Sanders. I was like, I didn't vote for Hillary. So for me, it's been a learning experience because I'm definitely out of what has been, defined as my comfort zone. And I'll have to repeat what I said. It's good that I'm going through this learning experience with the people that are here, because they're very gentle in their persuasions, and it's been like, I was one of those people that I hear the word anarchy and I think, all these crazy people running down streets, burning things down and throwing rocks and stuff like that. And, it's been a learning experience for me. And it's an experience of, it's true, you fear what you don't understand. It's fear what you don't know about. Mm-hmm. And, when you start to talk to people and you start to be around people and you see that, they aren't frothing at the mouth and, things like that. It's like, okay, I think I can handle this. So it's definitely been a learning experience for me. I don't know whether I'm actually ready to come out and say I'm an anarchist at this point. I'm still probing the possibility, but it's definitely been, it's an eye opener for me.
Cool. So anarchy is no rulers. Is basically what it comes down to, and like Cass was saying, when we look back into our recent history, all this history that we grew up with, it shaped us. But one of the things I like to do for myself, maybe it's an exercise in fantasy, I don't know, but is to think about human history in its entirety. And when we think about human history in its entirety, we probably lived as anarchists far longer than under this system. So we have that genetic memory in us of this cooperative living, and as a species, it's in there deep. So that's why when we get a chance to really talk about this, we think, oh, maybe I am an anarchist, because it's in there. And at some point in our history, our ancestors were anarchists. That's my belief. So getting a little bit more into philosophy, I wanted to talk about democracy, because it seems to me that it doesn't actually exist, that it's a meme, and so it's created by the system to make us feel like we are as free as we should be, but then when we act as sovereign human beings, we find ourselves up against that wall, which is, it's just a meme. It doesn't actually exist. So let's talk about democracy for a little bit.
Yeah, I think everything can kind of be understood in terms of power, right? So like, who actually has the power over, who do we have power with? And so definitely I think everybody in this room kind of was snapping at that, when you said democracy is a sham, it's meant to make us believe that we have a voice when in fact we don't. And again, that goes back to what I was saying with anarchy being part of anarchy being about localized power and, creating kind of a culture where we do want everybody to feel empowered and do want everybody to feel like they have a voice in the decisions that are made collectively. And I honestly, I don't know if, you could scale that up to such a big thing as this place some of us call the United States, like how would you be able to have that same sort of consensual decision making with that many people? And so that's why I feel like, most of us can't even do it right in a room with 3 or 4 people. So let's start there. Let's figure out how to do that, treat each other with respect, and make decisions together. And then we can move from there.
Yeah. This is Dan again. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of people are waking up to the fact that democracy is a sham. And a lot of people, I think, believe that somehow, democracy went awry in the last few decades or something, that there was a time that there was a great flourishing just democracy in this country, and then somewhere along the way corporations took over and things got bad. And it's like, this country, whatever democracy means, this country was never a place where people had say. This was a place where indigenous people never had say, black people never had say when they were forced here. And like, this country was founded on a very, very small group of ruling class white men having power, and that's what it's been ever since, and it will be so long as this place called the United States exists. And I think when we talk about, the language of democracy is used because it does make people feel like they have a say, and it makes people feel like it's not what it is, which is just brute violence and power over other people. And so, we don't really talk about democracy a lot. I think in these spaces we talk about autonomy and about organizing for collective liberation. And that's a very different thing than a liberal capitalist democracy, which we see what happens to it, even in the sense that, it's messed up in the first place, but even in the sense that democracy for a small group of people exists, crumbles away as fascism inevitably starts to take over, as the system eats everything up. And we're seeing that now, and the choice is really, I think, between extreme fascism and collective liberation, whether you call it anarchism or something else.
Yeah, totally. This is Cass. Yeah, Dan, you took the words out of my mouth. It's about autonomy, not democracy. Democracy, I don't even know how to think about that. Yeah, outside of small groups in which, but even then, like, that to me is more about consensus and compassion and these other things, that how we can think about them than democracy. And to get a little academic, like democracy, like demos, the root of it means people, and it really matters how you define people, and people who count and people who don't, and people who are people and people who aren't people. And that is the foundation of this country, is based on a conception of people that's exclusionary inherently, and that democracy, is a sham. It was always a sham. It was a way to subvert any sort of revolutionary, anti-authoritarian sentiment that was ever brewing. Let's give some table scraps. Let's give you a feeling of democracy. And in particular, in this country, in particular to white people, the so-called the wages of whiteness of, well, you're white, so you're not black, so you're not that. You're better, and you're part of this, and using democracy as a sham, but really as a form of bribery. It's a form of collective bribery on the part of the state to make people think that what's going on isn't going on. I don't like to think about democracy too much, because it's not something I can feel. It's not something I can hold. It's not really anything. It's just words. We just float away. And I want to stay grounded.
Hi, this is Kari again. My thoughts on democracy, I'll keep this pretty short and sweet, are that it's like set up to self-maintain. And when I think of democracy, I legitimately just had to look up this quote by Noam Chomsky. It says, "The smartest way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum." And that is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, in my opinion. They give you a small allowance, a small leash in which you can have thoughts and opinion on, and they try to ostracize anyone outside of that spectrum, and it's just really weird.
This is Jimmy. Gosh, I can't help but think of the ridiculousness that is a free speech zone. I don't know that I need to say much more, honestly, but I think it's been spoken about the illusion of democracy as being part of the illusion of what would be the American dream, which I am no longer a subscriber to, haven't been for a while, because it's not real. And I think in terms of process, democracy in and of itself if that is a thing to strive for, which I think it sounds really great. It's a process. A lot of this stuff is process oriented, and we're very much stuck in a different process that does not allow for even the experimentation of democracy without, like Dan was saying, like state repression. Once something is effective, of course it's going to get shut down, or of course it's going to be purchased by some sort of capitalist enterprise that is going to use it to, again, turn it back into, or we'll just say imperializing it, like they've done with many religions as an example. So I guess keeping that in mind, the concept is wonderful, and I think if we are actually taking steps to develop greater degrees of consent, as well as localized, decentralized communities that can turn out for one another in terms of mutual aid and can make their own governing decisions if they choose to govern, which is another word entirely when talking about consent. I think it's something that needs discussion, but also needs action in order to stop the kind of the rise of what I guess could be called fascism or neo-fascism. I'm not sure what people are calling it these days. I just know I have to deal with it all the time. So I like having people that can understand that and not question the reasons to fight, and just be able to fight and defend, engage in aspects of community self-defense, even if it is with the idea or concept of democracy being there without actually knowing what we're exactly going to look like. But that's how we get there, is consent process, understanding who you're fighting on behalf of or with and against.
Okay. This is like being back in college and political science class or philosophy class or whatever, and it's like I haven't had to use my brain this much in a while. Yeah. I don't know. I was just thinking that, it comes down to some points that were made earlier that, people just have respect for one another, and you don't see the differences in people as much as what you have in common and what the values that you share in that. And, I for some strange reason, I keep hearing John Lennon in the back of my head at this point. But, the whole idea of, the United States is better than any other country because of this or because of that. And it's, under whose definition? The United States definition, which is different from the United Kingdom definition or the German definition. And, when we see the group that we happen to be in as being better than, or being, an elite group, and anybody else who is not part of that group, by virtue of being different, makes them less of a person or less of a human. I think that's where we run into all of our problems. If we can just look at each other as fellow human beings on this spaceship called Earth that we have to share, and we have to get along, and we have to protect, and we have to, work with one another. I don't know. I think if we could get back to that sort of feeling where we're seeing each other eye to eye and not looking down on others, we would be so much better off. And I'm going to leave it at that.
All right. We're sharing some black raspberries that are delicious right now. So we have a few more minutes, and about 10 more minutes or so. But one of the things that's occurred to me as everybody is talking is this transitional place that we're all in, like as a species, as a country, in our communities, and politically. So I wanted to get a sense of, I've gone back and forth between, I found out about Trump becoming president when I was at Standing Rock, and we cried, and we thought, okay, we're all going to get killed now. Like, that was the first thing that came to our mind. But as time has gone on, I've seen how, in some ways, it's been a good thing because the veil is now lifted. There's no front to the fascism. Whereas before, Obama was like a kinder, gentler fascism that told you the kind of stuff you wanted to hear. So I just wanted to get your thoughts about leveraging the fact that the veil is lifted now and using that to move forward in lifting it further, I guess you could say. Yeah.
No, I actually kind of struggle with this question because we see a lot of folks being activated, whatever, showing up for rallies that probably wouldn't be doing anything if Hillary had won, and so that's been a question. A lot of people have been saying, oh, you got to meet people where they're at. This is the opportunity. Now is the time to bring them over. And I feel that, and I feel like somebody needs to do that. But I don't think that person is me, probably, because I've tried with a lot of folks, and I definitely think that is real. Like, a lot of people can be moved to understand that Trump is a symptom and not the problem in and of itself. And so I believe there is a chance to move those people, but at the same time, I also don't know if I have the time for that, because I also know there are a lot of people that are already more politically aligned with me. And so with that, there's also an opportunity for us to build and create what we want outside of what exists right now. And it's frustrating for me because I find it hard to believe that, once Trump leaves office, those people are probably going to go back to life as it was, and I don't know. People are comfortable being comfortable, right? So it's really right now we're all kind of feeling the same sort of strain, but some of us feel that strain before Trump, and we'll feel it after Trump, and so those are the people that I really want to build with, and people that I trust to have my back.
This is Dan again, and yeah, completely agree. I think that, for me, as someone who really came of age, was in high school, and got very politically involved when Obama was president, it's very interesting to see how many people in the last year or two, with this blatant rise of fascism, of which Trump is one aspect of that, but we see it all over, and we see it in all of these fascist groups organizing quite effectively in some places. And to see, how many more people are getting involved is super important, but I think it's definitely dangerous to see that as, oh, at least the veil is lifted now and everyone will rise up. I think that's a tendency of some people to see it like that. And what I've seen is how quickly kind of fascist demagogues can become pretty normalized, and how quickly, so many of the things Trump has already done, there should be mass uprisings, mass revolts, and there have been incredible resistance by a lot of people, but there's also a tendency of how quickly fascism can become normalized, and how quickly that takes over. People talk about, oh, impeach Trump. So Mike Pence, this Christian theocrat fundamentalist, can become president. It's insane. And there has been a really big fascist movement building for 30 years in this country, 40 years. Since this country's inception, but in its current form, we've really seen it in the last few decades. And, I just think we really, really have to be aware and really organize, because the fascists are organizing, and they're organizing quite effectively. And we have a really deep responsibility to try to out-organize them and out-fight them.
Yeah, this is Cass. I want to quickly issue a correction. I said Corrections Corporation of America when I meant GEO Group earlier when I was talking about who runs, just to not be the uninformed anarchist. I just forgot what acronym of terrible people I was dealing with at the time. But then there was a banner, and I remembered the banner. I think like I struggle with this question because the people who are out wouldn't be out if Hillary had won. But I think about it in this moment that there was a protest in Philly in which like all the Trump like strategists were meeting at this hotel, and it was this big like it was supposed to be like a queer dance party in the streets like outside of that hotel, and there was a chant that was started that said there was not my president, not my president, and it was just like I just got sick of it and just started shouting no more presidents, no more presidents. And the liberals who were chanting that like got really uncomfortable, looked and were like, wait, is that's what's being said? But then someone else like turned and was like, oh wait, that's what's being said, and started shouting it just as loud as I was. And I think that's the moment. It's not about the liberals who I know they're my enemy. I know they're not going to actually ever be about me. They were never about me. They're not going to be about me. But there's going to be other people out there. They're going to be like, oh wait, there is a way to plug in that's not this kind of thing that we've been seeing where people filter in and filter out when it's convenient, when they can be comfortable. So that's what I see as the potential is like catching people who are just coming up and finding out who my friends are that I didn't know I had.
Hi, this is Kari. So I'm sort of my involvement in this movement is sort of the result of me becoming aware of how fractured democracy is in our country. And so I feel like this conversation is super relevant to me. I know a lot of people who become involved in these movements because democracy isn't a reflection of the people's voice, and people are waking up to that and becoming aware of it. I mean, in the last general election, 40% of people who registered as Democrats didn't vote Democrat. They voted for other parties. And so when people say that Trump and Hillary aren't the problem, they're symptoms of the problem, that's exactly right. And not everyone can go and quit their jobs or leave their families and go and get involved in direct action. But I think oh no.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We could have done this longer, I think, but thanks for listening, and catch you next time.
No.